Welcome to Radio CIC. I'm your host, Tekoa da Silva. Here with us today is Jake Towne. Jake is on a fascinating journey in which he's running for Congress in Pennsylvania's 15th District. Jake, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. And so I'd like it if you could share with our listeners what you're doing down there in Pennsylvania and why.
Sure, I'm running for Congress as an independent, so that means I'm not affiliated with either the Democrat or Republican parties. And my campaign here has been hard at work for the past year and a half. We've raised over $50,000 all from private individuals. I've been invited to most of the main debates and everything, and the whole thing is I'm trying to spread a message. And the message is really through individual liberties and promoting peace. What the end result is prosperity. And I think that it's something that with the two parties that are really kind of running our whole country right now, it's an option that the American people are really looking for, or almost change, if you want to use that term. And what I call the whole system that we have is a two-headed one-party system. You have the Republicans that claim to be fiscally conservatives, but when you actually look at the facts, like when they were in power, they almost doubled the size of the federal government, increased spending by over 70%. So they're not fiscally conservative. And then when you look at the Democrats, they say, we'll stop these wars abroad and we'll protect your civil liberties. And they continue to expand these wars, and they continue to take away civil liberties with, things that, like I'm not making this up, CIA assassination programs, and also just reauthorizing the Patriot Act, which is for warrantless wiretapping, and can even have the FBI ransack your home and not have to tell you about it. So it's pretty interesting to hear both parties, complain about doing something when they get into power, not do anything about it, and when you get down to monetary policy, they really just kind of represent two sides of the same coin. They might prefer to spend your money a little bit differently, but the end of the result is all this massive federal spending and money printing that we see today.
One of the most fascinating facets of your campaign message that I saw right from day one was your advocacy of sound money. Can you tell us a little bit about your feelings there?
Yeah, well, it's so important. And when I say sound money, I mean a couple things. I do mean a hard currency, but I also just mean the actual government not spending all this excessive federal spending, because what is correct is we do need more spending, we do need more savings, but what we need is for individuals and businesses to be doing the saving and spending rather than the federal government. But the whole thing is, what it comes down to is when you realize the truth about our currency, the dollar, that it's a currency that is not backed by anything, it's just printed, if you will, out of thin air. When you realize those truths, you realize that this is why government doesn't have fiscal discipline. And those are really the two reasons that sound money is so important right now. Number one, to give businesses, entrepreneurs, and individuals a method to do economic calculation, a stable way to do it. And second of all, to impose like a fiscal discipline on government. And that's what I believe the second thing, the fiscal discipline on government, is really what's killing the United States economy and in a lot of ways the entire world economy right now.
Jake, could you tell us a little bit about what might happen to a lot of the things that we're seeing with big government, with centralized planning, were we to move towards a sound money, gold-backed system? And I would think, if you could correct me on this if I'm wrong, if we were to have that sound money system, it would be a pay-as-you-go model, right? Where if you don't have the money, you can't just run out and run up deficits and debt and borrow it?
Well, when you have sound money, what becomes very difficult for politicians to do is to spend like crazy, because there needs to be some type of way of taxation. And what politicians like so much about the current money or currency that we have, which is called fiat, and fiat just means, by decree, like they decree, this piece of paper, these electrons in your bank account have purchasing power, and they forbid you to use anything else for payment of debts, public or private. When you realize that, it becomes very easy to figure out where exactly they go. And what this money printing actually ends up being is it's a way to tax the population without them realizing it. That's what inflation is. Like, inflation isn't necessarily the increase of price in the goods, like a loaf of bread going from 1965 till now. it's also when you double the money supply in the long term, you're going to be roughly doubling the prices of these commodities and supplies.
Yeah, and I think something strange that happens along with that is if people's incomes do rise with inflation, they move up into higher income tax brackets, right?
Well, that's not what's occurring right now. Even though you might get a 3% or so raise, what's been happening over the last really 40 years is that real wages are basically stagnant or even dropping. And again, what the government is also able to do, and this helps them affect like payouts to, like, for instance, Social Security recipients, is they always understate the inflation rate, and by doing that, they pay out less to Social Security. And then when you get your raise every year, whether it's 3%, but inflation went up by 5%, you're actually losing in purchasing power. And again, what's most important is not how many dollars you have, but what you can actually purchase with those dollars.
I see. Jake, I want to ask you a little bit about your thoughts on foreign policy. To connect back with sound money, how do you think our foreign policies would change if we were to be on a sound money system? And what are your general thoughts here on foreign policy?
Well, in general, with having a sound currency, such as what happened back in really for about 100 years in the 1800s up until the start of World War I, what you had was a period of time where you had a lot of prosperity and advancement, and I think that that's probably, in terms of promoting commerce, trade, and even peace, it's the best thing. And what you'll very quickly find is what nation states will discard immediately is any form of fiscal discipline, any form of sound money when they need to go to war. And the reason they do that is they pretty much view the people as a way to confiscate their wealth from them to promote warfare. And if we had sound money, it would be very difficult, and the wars that would be carried out would be only just wars. In other words, wars that are defensive, caused by an aggressor, since that would be what the governments would rightly kind of fight against. But currently, with the United States, we have multiple wars going on in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and they are extremely dangerous to the future of our country. And the way I tell people is the gravest threat to our national security is not some boogeyman living in a cave in Pakistan. It's our national debt and the reckless spending of of the Congress, really. And it's Congress that's going to destroy our nation. Like, even if there was, I hope it does not occur, but even if there were other attacks on our nation, that would not destroy our nation. What's destroying our nation is going after these terrorists abroad. Like, for instance, our military brass, say in Afghanistan, there's less than 100 Al-Qaeda, the folks that caused 9/11, and yet we're going after them with 100,000 troops at a cost of $1 million apiece, and all these many more contractors on top of that. And what you get is, something that I think we should draw a historical lesson from the Revolutionary War. When George Washington fought the British, we didn't win because, George Washington was this brilliant tactician that won every single battle against, the British Empire. George Washington was a great tactician, but all of his plans were just to survive. He lost about every single battle, but he didn't care. The reason he didn't care is he knew that if he survived long enough and overstretched the British supply chains, eventually he would be able to defeat them. And sure enough, 9 years later, he was able to pull off the trick. And here we are, 9 years and counting in Afghanistan, the United States' longest war, and we don't really see any way out. And I think that that's the key thing, is that we're ruining our country economically while we have this undefined war against terror. And again, terror is just a military tactic. And to go about addressing Al-Qaeda the best way and the most cost-effective way, and the only way that has a chance of really working and stopping suicide terrorism, is to go after these criminals with small military groups and capture them and bring them to a court of law. And in our Constitution, we have something to go after these special warrants called mark and reprisal.
Something else I want to ask you about here is is gold, because I know that you've produced some writing on gold suppression, and it was very fascinating to see that coming from someone like you, because most of the folks who cover this issue are the newsletter writers and an organization like GATA, for example, and there's a lot of controversy there. And there's a lot of folks who don't believe it, and so it's a kind of a gray area in the gold market. So I'd like to ask you if you could share with our listeners a little bit of the content of your writings in that area and what you've learned.
Sure, I'm very familiar with the work of Gata and Bill Murphy and Chris Powell over there. And, when I first came across it, I kind of took it with a grain of salt, and it took a lot of really self-study before you understand the whole proposition. The proposition is actually very simple, that governments suppress the gold price in order to make their own fiat or paper currencies look good. And I think what's very important is to actually go back in history. And when you go back in history and see things like during the 1960s, with the London gold pool, was a period of time where the United States and Great Britain and a few other European central banks all acted together to suppress the gold price. And what's interesting and very important about that is that it's complete fact. Like, you can go through even today and just Google London gold pool or read the article that I wrote, and you can go back into the Federal Reserve minutes and you can read about the panic that these central bankers literally had while this plan was coming undone. And what they were doing back in the London gold pool is at first they were just suppressing the price and moving it downward, but very quickly they learned that since they were very effective at moving it downward by pulling their gold together, they were also able to push it down real far and then buy it on the way up. So they were actually able to grow the amount of gold that this gold pool had for a few years. But because the price overall was suppressed so low, eventually it came close to the point where France, namely, and a few other folks as well as private investors, kind of figured out the sham that they were keeping the price of gold artificially low, and the whole thing fell apart. And what were the consequences of that? The consequences were Nixon closing the gold window 3 years later in 1971, the Smithsonian Agreement, and what we currently have today, the paper price, the price off the LBMA and the COMEX is really a paper price of gold and silver, which has shot up in the recent month quite a bit. For a little while, gold was setting all-time highs in nominal dollars. And what I tell people is it's not gold or silver getting more expensive or anything like that. It's actually what we're seeing is the cheapening of these paper currencies, whether it's the euro, the yen, or the dollar.
I see. All right. Well, Jake, another thing that I want to begin talking about here, now that we've covered some of what's going on right now and your views and your messages for your campaign, is how you've come to see things through this perspective, how you've come to culminate your perspective on gold, how you've come to culminate your perspectives on the economy and foreign policy. And to discuss these issues, I want to go back and learn about your story here, what it was like for you. I know that you've done a lot of traveling. I know that you've worked overseas, and I'd like it if we could talk about those areas as well as your professional background during that time.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great question. My background is working as an engineer, and believe it or not, 3 years ago, all these things that I'm talking about, I like many citizens that I've gone out and talked with, I used to think that somehow the dollar was backed by gold. Like, I knew you couldn't get it at a bank, but I just kind of assumed that the government held the gold and somehow there was a tie to it, and the reality is there is no tie, and there really hasn't been any weak tie even since 1971. But I would also say that if I hadn't traveled and worked outside of the country, my views would probably be quite a bit different. And again, like the last 4 years, I worked abroad in Shanghai, China, in the semiconductor industry, so something very disconnected from my, currently running for Congress and everything. But while I was abroad, it exposed me to different views on foreign policy, which you just don't get from the American media. And our foreign policy is overall, from everyone that I've talked to, is very much looked down upon, and we're looked upon as an aggressor nation and kind of like the bully on the block, which when you look at our military spending, like we spend more on our military than the rest of the world combined. And at first when I went over to China, I saw all these things. I saw like they didn't have freedom of the press. Everything is censored over there. They don't really have freedom of religion. They don't really have speech.